I'm back again live. So I'm Mike Murphy, glad to welcome you to session, I guess 3 of our Future of Catholicism in America, kind of reflection, conversation. Happy to see everybody in the room, and a special welcome to our students who are the living future of this church. So you are most welcome to be here. On that score, I have just a couple of announcements, Hank Center type things. We have a table back there that has lots of programming, and that's what we do, and we just like you to be aware of what we're doing. We have a really big conference next fall on the Catholic imagination, and to my mind, it's one of the strengths of our tradition. Father Kenichi was talking about this in his talk, about dwelling in contraries is not dwelling in contradiction. So navigating opposites is really, really important in this tradition, and it takes a lot of courage and training and thought to do that. There's an old saying about Catholicism that's like you take 2 opposite things and hold them up together, and you proceed as if they're not opposite. And there's a lot of wisdom there, but it's hard when you want to just have something decided and move along. So the Catholic Imagination tries to retrieve that. We have authors and poets and filmmakers of all stripes: Tobias Wolff, Alice McDermott, Richard Rodriguez, Paul Schrader, who wrote and directed First Reformed, which was Academy Award nominated, which will be here, and a lot of scholars, 60 scholars. It's going to be something to see in September. So if you're still here, please be our guest. Closer to home, the Catholic Studies Minor are putting on Head and Heart on Thursday, April 11th. It's the John Courtney Murray Forum, who's a really important thinker in the church and as a Jesuit. And that's the forum. It's called the John Courtney Murray Forum, and it's exploring our interdisciplinary journey through the Catholic Studies Minor. Basically, though, it is what it proclaims to be, showing how these students navigate their whole person. We talk about core personalis at Loyola, and it's a full throttle affair that we educate the whole person, because the whole person needs to be educated in the sense that we have, desires are in our heart. We have intellectual needs. We have, bodily needs, and we try to understand what it means to understand that as made in the image and likeness of God. So that's something. So if you're interested in that, please come, or sign up for the minor if you want to add that to your life's bundle. It's easily done, so you're most welcome. With that, I will hand it over to my friend Peter Gilmore, who's going to moderate this panel, and I'd like to welcome you too, Father Larry Dowling, to Loyola. And good luck, gentlemen, and thanks for being here.
And thank you, Michael. First, let me congratulate and thank the editors, writers, and publishers of the book, The Future of Catholicism in America, which will be available for purchase at lunch today, is my understanding. Because without this volume, we wouldn't be here today reflecting on a faithful future. We would not have such an honest and insightful approach to our history, focused on more than a half century of the Catholic experience in this country. Among many other revelations in this book is the fact that we are all practicing Catholics. Perhaps not in all the rules and regulations, but in the eternal quest not to get it impossibly perfect, but in getting it better. And our presentation today by Father Larry Dowling is someone who probably comes as close to getting it perfect as possible in his ministry, particularly in the African American Catholic community here in Chicago at St. Agatha's Parish. So please join me in welcoming Father Larry to our program here today.
Good morning. I want to do one corrective for all the youth who are here. You're not only the living future of our church, you are the living present of our church as well. So just want to be clear about that. I come as to speak about the again, the public role of the church, and with particular focus on labor. And I'm going to approach it from a number of different perspectives, mainly because the perspective I come from is working directly with labor, both through a group called Arise Chicago, where I was chair of the board for 12 years, to work with workers' rights and to work with unions, but also to work with non-union workers to try to help them to find that dignity of finding work and finding that respect in the workplace that is not always there. The alarming statistic in Chicago is that every day in Chicago proper, there is $1 million in wage theft. $1 million in wage theft. And that affects mostly immigrant populations, but also other populations. So I think to recognize that as a huge issue in regard to how we as people of faith need to respond, I think is really important. One of the things at St. Agatha, which is a predominantly African-American church on the west side of Chicago, one of the things that we do at the end of our service every Sunday is together we close the Mass and together everyone says, be church after church. Be church after church. We say that all together. It was started by one of our previous deacons 20 years ago. And it just is a great way to remind us that we are called to be active in the community, and not only as individuals, but also collectively. So it's how do we make a difference as individuals, but also how do we call ourselves as a parish community to be active as a collective group, to be able to walk with others, to defend their rights. One classic example of that was a couple of years ago when we were fighting for the police accountability in our community and here in Chicago. We still are having that fight. And one Saturday evening, we gathered with the police and other residents around one hotspot in the community to stand together to resist the gangs. On that same day, the next day, on Palm Sunday, a group of about 60 parishioners after Mass marched over to the local police to protest police brutality. So those contrasts of accompaniment, but also challenging those in power to be able to do better. So when we talk about our Catholic social teaching, and when we talk about especially the lives of the people that we are in our pews, and the people that we seek to serve within the broader community, again, the key, I think, for all of us is, especially in ministry, is how are we ministering not just to our own parishioners, but how are we ministering to those who live around us, to those who are directly affected by the forces, the trauma, the internal forces, the external forces that continue to plague our neighborhoods like North Lawndale and so many others. But the issue in terms of workplace rights and workplace abuse and the issues of wages and workplace environment are not just about black and brown, but obviously white as well. If you have the opportunity, there's a great play at the Goodman right now called Sweat. Has anybody seen that yet? Okay. I highly recommend it because it gives it just an incredible view of the dynamics of work and corporate, corporate movement, corporate oppression, but in the dynamic of Hispanic and African American and white. It's set in Reading, Pennsylvania, and it just captures beautifully the incredible tension that oftentimes employers set up to divide people rather than obviously to unite and to bring people together. So the issue of wage theft is something that we, again, as Catholics, we seek to address, to be able to try to raise up and accompany people where they are at. Now, oftentimes we'll ask other pastors, have you ever, from the pulpit, talked about people's work? Has anyone here from your churches that you've attended ever heard a priest talk about the workplace and people's workplace? Good. One. For me, the disconnect I think, in many of our churches is that we're not talking about where people are at. We're not talking about the day-to-day things that affect people in our parishes. And work is such an integral part of who we are. You know, the scriptures tell us very clearly that work is sacred. It reflects the work of God. It reflects value. It reflects, our human dignity. And it is meant to, and it's something that we do for a huge part of our life. So it's how do we recognize that? And how do we also recognize that people are struggling every day from different circumstances in their workplaces? How do we let them know that we care about that? And how do we let them know that we are willing to walk with them to help them to address some of those concerns? Thankfully, the Catholic Church has stepped up in terms of its involvement in workplace rights. Catholic Campaign for Human Development is more and more funding organizations that support workers' rights, and that's been great to see. So that, again, that sense of how do we build that real connection with our people on the issues that directly affect them? How do we speak to that from the pulpit? How do we address that and then walk with them? Again, another way, which was mentioned earlier, is the whole sense of organizing as communities. And the importance, obviously, organized labor is very much under threat in our country right now. Union membership has gone down drastically for lots of different reasons. But workers' rights more and more are being threatened, not only in union places, but in other places as well. And so, again, as church, how do we exercise that our church social teaching about the dignity and sanctity of life and recognize the dignity of work and help people to realize that work is so important and essential in people's lives and that it allows them some dignity. Quick story, when I first went to St. Agatha 12 years ago, I was approached by a friend of mine from my previous parish who said he had 8 jobs available in construction. And he asked me if I could identify 8 men from the community who would be willing to take on those jobs, who I could somewhat guarantee that, would show up, would do the work, would go through the training, and do all those things necessary. And so through a friend of mine who was a former gang member, I reached out to him and I said, can you identify 8 guys for me? And he said, well, I'll identify 20, I'll bring them together with us, and from those 20, we can figure out which 8, we can offer the jobs to. So we did that, they went to work, and things went really well. In January of the next year, one of them called me and said, Father, we want to thank you for the jobs that you got for us. And I said, well, you're welcome. And they said, no, we want to thank you. I said, well, what do you mean? They said, we want to thank you by turning in all of our guns to you. We want to thank you by, turning in our guns. I said, okay, so let's figure out a time. So the next day actually turned out to be Martin Luther King Day, and so there wasn't anybody around, so they came over around noon time. Each of them brought a black trash bag with at least 4 or 5 guns in each of the bags. And we took them out and laid them all over the rectory table, dining room table, and they said, Father, we give these to you. We don't need them anymore. We needed them because our previous job was selling drugs on the street, and we needed protection. We needed protection for our families. We have jobs now. We have dignity. We are earning a good salary, and we are able to take care of our families. We do not need these anymore, and so we give them to you. And so I thanked them and sent them on their way, called a couple of police friends of mine and said, come over, I got a surprise for you. And they came over and they said, Father, of course we need to ask you where you got the guns. I said, you got them from me. And they said, okay, fair enough, and took the guns away. So no questions asked. But again, it's that sense of dignity that is so important to recognize in the lives. And so in terms of community organizing, from the church's perspective, which we do through an organization called Community Renewal Society here in Chicago, what we do is we try to raise up ways to remove obstacles for people to get jobs. And so we've done a lot of things in regard to legislation at the state level, to help eliminate bars for employment for ex-offenders in both the education system and the healthcare system in Chicago. We've done work at the local level, at the city level, in regard to setting up a workers' rights office and an office of standards in terms of workplaces to hold businesses accountable. So again, there's that sense of working together with other faith traditions to be able to hold up this dignity of work and to make sure that in every way possible we meet that need, that very basic need, that need that provides dignity for individuals, the ability to care for themselves, the ability to say that I'm doing something meaningful, the ability to say that I am able to take care of my families. And we were able to do that more and more for individuals in our community. Those who are getting out of jail, who we work with inside the jail, so that they come to us so that we can find them employment and help them stay on that path to legal employment, if you will. The one thing that I also want to raise up, one of the things that we do in the community is very much about restorative justice. And does everybody here know what restorative justice is? Okay, hopefully a lot of people do, but restorative justice is, in contrast to retributive justice, which is what our current criminal justice system is really based on. And so in terms of restorative justice, what we try to do is to find ways to bring people together in dialogue. And this is much broader than the worker movement, but it is, I think, in terms of the previous conversation that we had with the previous speakers, it really is about how do we bring people together in a safe space to have real dialogue on issues that are affecting everyone. So at St. Agatha, we hold monthly conversations on race. We are holding monthly conversations for individuals in the community who are unemployed on helping them to walk through that period of unemployment and hopefully move them into employment. We are doing various ways. We are inviting people to come together in lots of different ways and to try to bring this dialogue in a safe space, in a confidential space, where people feel the freedom to speak, where everyone brings a wisdom, everyone brings experience, everyone brings their life stories, and we are all enriched and empowered by that collective voice. Restorative justice is more and more, thankfully, a movement that is growing. In North London, we've established a restorative justice court in the community, the first one in the United States, still in its infancy, but we are working hard to make sure that it works, to allow individuals who are accused of crime or who would likely end up going through the regular court system to be able to come to this court and essentially through a process that involves them sitting down with the person or persons they've harmed to work out a repair of harm agreement so that everyone is satisfied with the result, and then they come back before the judge and have no record from that point forward. So it's, again, different ways to employ this restorative justice, these restorative justice principles that come really out of our Catholic social teaching. It's about relationship. It's about mutual care, common good, all those sorts of things that are really important for us to support along the way. A couple other things. I've got a couple of minutes still. 5 minutes. Okay. All right. So in terms of the restorative justice work that we do, again, a lot of it is around how do we bring people together in conversation. So we do a lot of work with parents in the community who are struggling. We do some initial work in juvenile detention. We do weekly work in Cook County Jail. And as individuals get out of Cook County Jail, as parents and they're, who have juveniles in juvenile detention, connect with our church, we're able to sit with them and again help them to again gain that sense of dignity for themselves. But then we always will try to draw in their children, so that the whole family is being exposed to this collective conversation where everyone has a voice, where there's communication, where there is non-judgment, where there is this whole sense of, the the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. It's that sense of how do we help others to share their stories, to be affirmed in their various roles as workers. And workers are not just those who work in a workplace, but women who daily, go home, and women and men who daily go home and care for their children, single parents, many, unfortunately, in our community who are unemployed because they have records. 60% of our community has been court involved at one time or another, so you can imagine the effect that has had on the possibilities of employment. But it is to gather people together, again, to claim that dignity as part of a collective dignity. And in doing so, also to say, okay, how can we together take this energy of mutual support and invite others into these conversations and ultimately build a big enough force, with the help of God in the center of that to help us to move forward. One of the tensions that I know is, in our culture and in the church is this whole conservative these conservative liberal categories. And in my insight in that, if someone says that I'm a liberal or and nobody would ever consider me a conservative, but I always like to speak in terms of what is it as church that we need to conserve? What are the values that we want to conserve? What are the key aspects of our church? The sacraments, our social teaching, those things that are key and really rooted, help us to be rooted in the faith and in Christ. But then on the liberal side, I try to say instead, and who is it that we need to help be liberated? Besides ourselves, in what ways do we need to be liberated? So the conservative liberal labels to me are like, let's talk about what is it we want to conserve? What are the things that we need to really reflect on that are important for us all to conserve, in terms of tradition, in terms of how we seek to live in the life of Christ. And what is it and who is it that we need to liberate? Again, including ourselves. And in what ways can we use those gifts that the church offers, and perhaps use them in new ways, creative ways, to be able to address those aspects of our culture that need liberation. So again, it's opening ourselves up to that spirit that is about truly recognizing that we are all part of the body of Christ and all part of this wonderful church that is very diverse, has a huge umbrella for lots of different people, and yet together we are called to service to God's people, and especially in light of Francis and St. Francis as well, that call to work on the margins, to go out to the places, to go out and be church after church, especially in those places where people are not given that dignity, are not provided that protection that they deserve, so that they can find that protection and indeed pursue and fulfill their God-given potential. So with that, all right.
If I may be so bold as to speak for the majority of the people gathered here in this room today, not everybody, but the majority, I think you have just brought us into a world we really don't know very well at all. And I just want to thank you, first of all, for bringing us into this world. I think many of us have read about this world, but we've never experienced it firsthand as you have. And last night there was quite a bit of discussion and conversation about encounter and the importance of encountering the other. And I'm just wondering how you see what you are doing there in terms of your frontline ministry in the African American Catholic community, making a contribution to the future of American Catholicism. Kind of a big ending there.
Okay, all right. So my passion is always around what can we do locally, but what can I affect? So I love the question. What can be done to extend that universally? And so again, the word encounter is truly important. And again, the way that we do restorative justice in the church, the way that we try to engage people at a level where we are building relationship with each other, where we are talking about some difficult topics, but in a safe space where we can share our opinion. The key for me in Encounter is it is always first about building relationships. So when we decide we're going to start a group on unemployment, those who are unemployed, we spend the first 2 times doing circle just simply getting to know each other, simply sharing stories, hopes, dreams, struggles, those sorts of things. And then we get into the meat over, once we build that base to then start having conversations around the real meat of the situation and what the reality is, and then start talking solutions as well. Because as the energy shifts, from a sense of helplessness to a sense of collective power, then things will happen. And again, that's the work of the Spirit. That's why when we do circle, everyone has a voice. Only one person can talk at a time. There is this commonality of value that we share in the circle. So the 4 basic values that have to happen in every circle is to be respectful, to be active listeners, to be non-judgmental, and to hold confidentiality within the circle. Those are the 4 values that are necessary. So as we do that, we are seeking to engage people in the community and beyond the community. And so we're starting to do some work with circles with some of our sharing parishes and bringing them in, some of the people from our sharing parishes, so that we can expose them to, the realities of our community, but also to hear their stories of their own struggles and realize that there's a lot of commonality in the struggles, different situations, different life situations, but there's a lot of commonality there. And then together, how do we work together to bring this further and further out into the culture? God's love is always inviting us to continue to expand, to always to always extend outward. And so it's how do we do that? How do we open ourselves to that life-giving power of God to extend beyond ourselves and to take the risks of love? And taking the risks in our community has been to draw people who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, to bring people who are struggling in lots of different ways, to bring police officers into our circles, to bring the people who are prejudiced, racist into our circles, and to be able to again draw those conversations together so that we come in touch with first our own humanity, each individual's humanity, and then to be able to live that out and to recognize that and to share again the commonality and realize that we're all in this together, and that the divisions that are out there are false divisions, that if we truly come into relationship with each other, that we can break those down. And I believe that has a great power, and I think this movement for restorative justice is more and more taking root, and it's exciting to see.
When I was talking to Father Larry at the break, I asked him how many of his parishioners live outside the geographical area of the parish, and he said about half, which is probably about the same number of parishioners who choose to go to parishes other than their geographical parishes in large urban areas in America. I think it's an incredible statistic that has been relatively ignored in diocesan reconfigurations. But that's just a little editorialization on my part. To what extent do you think the peace circles and restorative justice emphasis that you give to ministry has attracted so many geographical outsiders to your parish?
For me, it really is about people who are engaged by the idea of conversation, where there's a freedom to speak, where there's a freedom to share their experience, freedom to share their opinions, free to share their stories. And I think the attraction also is in hospitality, because you walk into the doors of St. Agatha and you are immediately greeted by at least 20 people who welcome you and embrace you and all of that. So I think that sense of hospitality that invites people into a relationship, that we are all individuals, but we all collectively have something to offer, that we are all the body of Christ, and to be able to recognize that and reverence that, and to be able to draw others into it. As we engage with, especially some of our sharing parishes, but other parishes, over the years have been asked to go out to some suburban parishes, just simply to talk about how the suburban parishes can help us address some of the concerns about violence in our community. Oftentimes, the initial answer is, we need money. But that's not where I go first. It's always about how do we build relationship? How can we come together? We come to you, you come to us, and how do we build relationship that is going to, in the process, help us to find ways to help each other, to engage each other. And so it's really about that invitation to others to come to share their gifts, to come to share their experience, come to learn more and more about these types of things. Over the past few weeks, I've had the opportunity to go out and to a couple of our sharing parishes where families have hosted, just brought some of their friends together, and I have 4 of my staff members come out, and we spend a good 3-4 hours just mingling and talking about what we do and the experiences that we have. And again, the eyes are opened, and more people say, I want to come out and visit. I want to come out and be a part of these things. And so that's an energy that's building, and more I think we're going to have more people want to at least join us in those conversations and find ways to bridge those differences of distance and economics, and realize that there are strong connections in terms of our faith and our commitment to justice.
If I may, as moderator, just ask one more question before we open it up to the group. Last night, during our conversation, there was talk about social media and the conflating information with judgment that takes place instantaneously on social media in competition with reflection, meditation, and prayer, basically. And you had made reference to the activism of your parish, marching on the police station at Palm Sunday, and I'm sure there's all sorts of other examples. And I'm wondering how you see meditation, reflection, and prayer, particularly the liturgy, informing the activism, and how you make space for that within activism.
So the key is to be rooted in faith. And so the community organizing group that we work with is a faith-based community organization. Though at times we find ourselves, focusing on particular issues, we always have to call ourselves back to the roots of faith and what it is that motivates us, who it is that motivates us to do what we are called to do. And so in our prayer, in our outreach, in the ways that we seek to engage beyond the community, we have to find ways to fortify that within ourselves. So our Sunday celebrations really are, I often ask people, okay, why do you come to church on Sunday? And the invariable answer is to get something out of it. Well, which is always the wrong answer, because the right answer is to give praise to God, to give thanks to God for all the things we do. And if we do that well, then God feeds us, God strengthens us, God gives us what we need to be able to do what we're called to do. And so, which is, why worship is so important, which is why, scriptures and the proclamation of scriptures is important, which is why music, especially in the black community, is so important to engage all of the levels of that, so that in the process and in the preaching, I'm able to raise up those issues that are affecting people and engage the community in, okay, how do we address these things? How do we collectively as a community do this? And again, always centered in faith. And when we go out, we're always going to come back and we're going to pray and we're going to reflect on what we've just done. We're going to, always reconnect to the source who has called us to go out and do what we've been called to do, and to come back and to evaluate, yes, but also to reflect on how is it that we have lived our faith? How have we been faithful in the mix of this all? The common conversation in our society is how can you be successful? And I think our challenge as church is more to say how can we consistently be faithful to what we are called to do. And it's a huge contrast because society is so focused on success, and many of our parishes are focused on success and numbers and all of that. The key is for me is faithfulness. And how do we call each other individually and collectively to that faithfulness to God's love, to that faithfulness to be active, to each and every one of us in our own way add our unique value to the world, to be able to really extend that beyond. And it always has to come back to to prayer, to conversation with God. Again, I always say in my congregation, prayer doesn't change God, prayer changes us. And so how do we speak what we need to speak to God? How do we listen to what God needs to speak to us? And how do we enter into that conversation in a way that we truly are listening, both individually and collectively, to the voice of God, who then calls us to go forth and truly to share the incredible giftedness that is in us all, individually and collectively, for the good of others.